Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about something pretty practical,
Mm-hmm.
something I think we've probably all struggled with at some point, setting healthy boundaries.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and specifically, we're going to look at it through a lens of faith.
Okay.
So we're talking about godly, healthy
I
boundaries.
like it.
We've got some great excerpts here from Creating Healthy Boundaries, and we're really going to try to figure out what they are, how to set them, and really why they matter, especially for those of us who are, trying to walk a path of faith.
Right. Yeah.
And I think the big thing here is that, you know, we want to serve others. We want to live a life that honors God.
Absolutely.
But sometimes we can end up feeling stretched so thin
Yeah.
that we're not really much good to anybody. You know what I mean?
Easily.
So this deep dive is really about finding that balance
Yeah.
between like pouring ourselves out
Yeah.
and also keeping ourselves
Yeah.
healthy.
Taking care of ourselves. It's interesting because it's almost like that idea of, you know, self-care is part of honoring God
Okay.
because our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So how do we take care of that temple?
So that brings up a question for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Because this whole idea of godly, healthy boundaries, what makes it godly?
Oh,
You know what I mean?
that's a good.
It's not just like regular boundaries.
Right.
Like, what makes it different?
That's a great question. And I think the thing that makes a boundary specifically godly is that it comes from a place of seeking God's will
Okay.
and understanding his design for our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just about like setting limits for the sake of it. It's about recognizing that our time, our energy, even our emotions,
Yeah.
these are resources that he's entrusted us with.
Okay.
And we need to be wise stewards of those things.
You know what's interesting? It makes me think of that story of Mary and Martha
Oh, yeah?
in Luke 10,
Uh-huh.
where, Martha is like running around,
Yeah.
doing all the serving and stuff.
Busy, busy, busy.
And Mary is just sitting at Jesus' feet, listening. And when Martha complains, Jesus kind of gently points out that, like, Mary has chosen the better part.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's such a good reminder that, like, sometimes the most godly thing we can do is create space
Yes.
for rest and connection with God.
Absolutely.
So it's not selfish to, like, prioritize
Yeah.
that,
No, not at all.
our well-being.
No. And in fact, I think it actually equips us to better serve others. That's a good point. When we're rested and we're filled up, we can pour out
Okay.
from a place of overflow.
So the source also talks about a bunch of practical benefits, like balance, honoring God, healthier relationships. I've got to be honest. It all sounds a little too good to be true. Can boundaries really do all that?
I think it's easy to think that, but think about it this way.
Okay.
When we're constantly overextended and we're running on empty, our relationships suffer.
Right.
We get irritable, we get resentful, we can even burn out on the very things that we're trying to do for God. So boundaries actually allow us to show up more authentically and lovingly in our relationships.
Okay, so like how does that actually work?
Well, let's say, for example, you're constantly volunteering at church,
Okay.
which is a great thing,
Uh.
but it's leaving you exhausted and short-tempered with your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that.
Setting a boundary on your volunteer hours could actually allow you to be more present for your loved ones, which is also a way of honoring God's design for family.
That makes sense.
Right.
So it's like you're saying yes to your family
Yeah.
by setting that boundary with the church.
Exactly.
It makes me think of that proverb, Proverbs 25:1. Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he have his fill of you and hate you.
Oh, wow.
That's good.
That's a powerful one.
Even in close relationships, there's wisdom in setting boundaries.
Absolutely.
So speaking of wisdom, the source actually outlines like these 3 steps to setting boundaries.
Okay.
And the first one is seeking God's guidance.
That's huge. Yeah.
Then clarity about our limits.
Yeah.
And then communicating those boundaries with love and grace.
That's important.
Now, I've got to say, that first step,
Mm-hmm.
seeking God's guidance,
Yeah.
I kind of struggle with that.
Yeah.
Like, how do you actually do that?
It's kind of abstract, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like practically? Well, for me, it always starts with prayer.
Okay.
But it's not just about asking God, what boundaries should I set? It's more about asking him, God, what are your priorities for me in this season?
Okay. Yeah.
What does it look like to steward my time and energy well? Where do I need to pull back so that I can pour into the things that truly matter to you?
That's good.
And sometimes, journaling helps me.
Yeah.
to kind of process those thoughts and feelings. Or even talking to a trusted spiritual mentor,
Yeah.
someone who can offer a little bit of an outside perspective,
Okay.
can be really helpful.
So it sounds like it's about aligning our priorities
Yeah,
with God's
absolutely.
and then figuring out what limits we need to
Wow.
protect those priorities.
Yes.
But then the source goes on to this next step
Yeah.
of communicating those boundaries.
Yeah.
And they emphasize doing it with love and grace,
That's important. Yeah.
which I imagine can be really tough,
Yeah.
especially when people are used to us
Yeah.
always saying yes.
Right. Yeah.
So how do you actually do that?
Well, I think it's about being clear and assertive while still showing kindness and respect.
Okay, that's a good point.
So, for example, let's say somebody asks you to head up a new project at church, but you're already feeling overloaded. Instead of saying like a resentful, okay, I guess you could say something like, I care about you and I want to support the youth group, but I can only commit to helping once a month to ensure that I have time for my family commitments as well.
That's great.
So you're explaining your reasons. You're focusing on your needs. You're not blaming them.
It's not about them.
It's about you and your relationship with God.
Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah.
So it takes the focus off of saying no to the request,
Yeah.
and it puts it on saying yes
Yes.
to what God is calling you to. And that brings us to that final point from the source.
Yeah.
This idea of creating space for God's presence
Yes.
and living a life of purpose.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it's all about.
So how do boundaries play into that?
That's a good question. Because I think sometimes people think that boundaries are about like shutting people out or becoming isolated, but it's not about that at all.
It's not about closing doors. Yeah.
It's about clearing the clutter, the distractions, the
Yeah.
unnecessary obligations that are keeping us from truly connecting with God
Okay.
and living out his purpose for us. When we have healthy boundaries, we create space for God to speak to us, to guide us, to renew us.
That's good, yeah.
And that space allows us to discern his will more clearly and to pour our energy into the things he's truly called us to.
So it's not just about saying no. It's about saying yes to a deeper, more intentional life. Our actions are actually aligning with our faith. Wow, this has been so eye-opening. It's making me really think about where I need to create some healthier boundaries so I can better serve God
Yeah.
and better serve others. So for all of you listening, where do you feel stretched thin?
Yeah. Where are you feeling the pressure?
Yeah. What's one boundary that you feel like God might be nudging you to explore? Remember, this is a journey. It's not a destination.
That's so true. And God is with you every step of the way, guiding you towards a life of freedom and purpose.
That's beautiful. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
Bye, everybody.